Dr. Marisol Reyes stood alone on the Marina Green at 4:11 a.m., the hour the sky forgets whether to hold the moon or beckon the sun. The salt-crusted wind blew her hair into briny streamers, and the fog rolled across the bay like fur tossed by some restless animal. Above the water, the Golden Gate Bridge stretched from headland to headland, a span of vermilion steel. Suspension cables and bolts large enough to anchor myths, yet Marisol no longer saw engineering or ornament. She saw a serpent, titan-sized, crimson-scaled, curled between the Presidio and Murren, its spine shaped into two proud towers, its ribs into trusses humming with drowsy breath. The serpent had been sleeping for 86 years. Every motor rumble across its back, every gull's cry, every tourist's footstep made it stir. But never enough to unfurl. The city depended on its slumber. If it woke, the gleaming arch would straighten into a leviathan that might coil around hills, crush neighborhoods, or slip into the sea, taking its roadway like a raft of ants on a departing log. The bridge's sleep was a covenant steel for dreams, traffic for snores, and Marisol was its unlikely guardian. She had not always spoken in hushes to infrastructure. 12 years earlier, she was the youngest research seismologist ever hired by the United States Geological Survey in Menlo Park, a prodigy who translated tectonic mathematics into colorful graphs the public could trust. Equations were her first language, the Earth's murmur her second. But numbers could not foretell the day a thrust fault snapped beneath an Indonesian island, sending a tsunami tumbling toward the coast, where her partner, Jonah, vacationed. She had charted the wave's velocity, yet could not impede its roar. When the ocean receded, Jonah was gone, and Marisol's confidence in the cold elegance of data washed away with him. She quit the USGS, bought a converted tugboat, and drifted along the Pacific Rim, listening, not measuring, listening to the memories stored in rock, water, and wind. On a fog-heavy night near Hokkaido, she met an Ainu elder who recognized grief in her pulse and taught her that vibration, whether syllable or seismic, is a kind of medicine. Marisol traded spreadsheets for rattles and tuning forks, studied chant patterns mapped on animal hides, and found herself becoming something the university had never accredited: a shaman of waveforms. San Francisco called her home last winter, when a 3.2 micro-quake rattled the Embarcadero and commuters swore they heard the bridge whisper. Whisper, not groan, a sound like a cello bow brushing a kettle drum, soft yet immense. Marisol recognized the timbre of a half-dreaming serpent. She moved back into the city's cluttered heartbeat and waited, learning the serpent's breathing cycle. Streetcars dinged, ships honked, tourists squealed, and through it all the bridge exhaled metallic lull, faithful steel. Let me sleep. Then the foreshock swarm started 3 days ago, tinny pops beneath the San Andreas, stitched up and down the peninsula. Marisol sat in her rented apartment in North Beach, interpreting them the way cardiologists read arrhythmias. The frequency was climbing, the intervals shrinking. These were pulls of tremors kneading the mattress on which the serpent lay. At 4:11 a.m., another jolt rippled through the ground. It was mild enough that only the harbor's anchored sailboats chimed, but Marisol's bones knew larger waves gathered behind it. She pressed her palm to the asphalt. Under its chemical chill, she felt the restless shudder of locked plates storing centuries of tension. Sempre sisire, Marisol said. Sus inatresa. If the expected quake, maybe a 7.4, arrived, the surface waves alone would rattle the serpent awake. Concrete could be rebuilt, steel could be reforged, but a myth once awakened into rampage might never find dreaming again. A gull screamed overhead, tracing a circle before diving for invisible prey. Marisol slid a cedar box from her backpack. Inside lay 4 brass foghorn reeds, salvaged from decommissioned lightships, a leather pouch of obsidian dust, and a hand-carved ocarina shaped like a nautilus. These were her instruments of calming, their keys tuned to the chord progressions of Pacific storms. She closed the box and gazed at the bridge, whose roadway lights glowed like embered scales along the Serpent's back. "Not yet," she whispered. "Let me find the song." The city hummed behind her. A solitary lift rolled down Marina Boulevard. Its tires hissed, an exhalation that made the Serpent twitch. Marisol listened to the bridge's breathing accelerate, steel expanding in pulses, cables thrumming like violin strings warming up. Somewhere under Fort Point, a rivet pinged as if a scale flexed. The lullaby would need to be stronger than anything she had ever sung. She walked across Crissy Field, her boots squelching in damp grass, and ascended the trail toward the bridge's southern anchorage. Fog thickened, swallowing sodium lamps in halos. When she reached the first tower's base, the concrete footing was warm, vibrating with each truck above. She knelt, spreading obsidian dust in a crescent. Volcanic glass, solidified fury, cooled into clarity. "For boundaries," she murmured, and tapped the dust with her middle finger. The particles quivered, aligning into a pattern like a topographic map, boundary drawn. When she stood, an unexpected shape emerged from the fog. Ayo. Damien Cho, San Francisco's chief emergency planner. He was dressed in a neon jacket, one hand clamped on a radio. "Dr. Reyes?" he asked, voice pitched between exasperation and hope. "We've been looking for you." "I turned my phone off," she replied. "We've got tremor models lighting up the servers. Accelerometers are chirping all over the peninsula. People upstairs think the big one's imminent. Your servers are correct. Then come back to the command center," he pleaded. "We need your expertise. You need my lullaby." She gestured to the riveted tower. "If the quake hits full force, the Serpent wakes." Damien's jaw parted, but he had worked with her years ago, back when her reports formed the foundation of city policy. He knew she chose metaphors like scaffolding around truth. "What do you need from us?" "Silence." She inhaled. "Salt, fog, diesel, and access to foghorns." "The actual foghorn arrays?" "They're automated now. Everything runs on satellite triggers." "Manual override," she said. "Old tones, the ones sailors felt in their sternums." Damien's radio crackled. Someone barked updates of a 4.1 near Daly City. Streetlights flickered once, as if disapproving of further continuity. Damien toggled the volume down. "We can cut in, but you'll have to time it yourself." "I always do." She brushed past him onto the maintenance walkway. "Clear bridge traffic, both directions. Nobody should ride when the Serpent turns in bed." He hesitated only a second, then nodded briskly into the radio. "Golden Gate Operations, this is command. Initiate Red Crown. Full closure, I repeat, full closure. Citing seismic protocol, Tango 1. Horns wailed, not the foghorns she desired, but mechanical klaxons. Cars rolled to a halt, red tail lights stringing like rubies in mist. Marisol stepped onto the steel grating. Beneath her, the dark water swirled, and vibration traveled up through her soles. The Serpent's thoughts, she believed, traveled through these currents. Dreams of deep trenches, songs of baleen whales, memories of volcanic birth. She laid her hand on the railing. "Hush," she breathed. "You will not need to rise." The lullaby would require 4 movements, each corresponding to an elemental note: deep, drift, loom, and home. She inhaled again and let her pulse slow to match the periodic sway of the suspended deck. Movement 1, deep. She placed the Nobilis ocarina to her lips and blew a subterranean sea, low and tremulous. The tone spiraled through the tubes like whale call captured in clay. Fog responded, condensing around her ankles. The Serpent's side tower and cables vibrated sympathetically. She played a descending minor third, a sound older than charts, and traced arcs in the air with her free hand. The obsidian dust back at the tower lifted, swirling like black snow caught in reversed gravity. "Deep," whispered steel joints. "Deep Movement 2, drift. Marisol uncased 2 foghorned reeds, each the length of her forearm. She set them against her lips like twin flutes and summoned the rush of offshore wind through brass. These tones were mournful, distant yet intimate, the exact chord sailors once used to gauge hidden shoals. She interlaced them with the bridge's innate hum at 106 hertz. The Serpent's breathing slowed, though tremors underfoot quickened. New foreshocks, 4.8 near Half Moon Bay. Movement 3, loom. This was the tension phase, the part of the lullaby that acknowledged fear instead of denying it. She drew a wooden striker from her coat and tapped the bridge railing. Ping 1 strike. Pause. Ping 2. The pattern mimicked the microquake sequence hitting the peninsula. 2.9, 4.1, 4.8. She let the bridge's built-in resonance carry each strike up the cables to the towers, then back across the deck like circulation. The Serpent, a being of momentum, needed to recognize the quakes as a dream, not a summons. She heard it then. A vast inhalation. Not wind, not ocean. Metal diaphragm, kilometers wide. Drawing breath. The Serpent was turning. Damien's voice wobbled behind her. Dr. Reyes Marisol. The sensors show a spike at the Bridge North Pier. Something's flexing beyond design. Hold your position, she answered without turning. She rolled her shoulders, summoning every chant, every rune taught on her journey. In Ainu, in Tagalog, in the tectonic grammar of compressed quartz. I'm not done. Movement 4, home. She needed the horns at Point Bonita, Point Diablo, and Alcatraz to join, forming a cradle of sound around the Serpent's body. She raised her hand toward the dark shoreline and whistled a sequence. Short, long, long, short. The manual override code she had arranged with Damien 5 years ago during a joint exercise that was never needed until now. Somewhere in the Presidio, technicians recognized it and flipped century-old switches. The first horn at Point Diablo uttered a gerst sonorous, round, redwood thick. Alcatraz answered in E-flat, weaving minor warmth through the caves. Point Bonita released a D, steady as anchor chain. Marisol angled her reeds to slip into the triad. Brass and brine melted together, building a suspension cord that wrapped the whole bay in acoustic kelp. The Serpent exhaled through every cable, a sigh that misted the fog lights. The tremor beneath her feet plateaued. Despite the seismometer's frantic scribble, the surface waves under the bridge flattened as though the Earth's crust recognized a boundary of mercy. But farther south, the main shock finally exploded, a 7.4 epicenter near Woodside. The hill country buckled. Glass shattered in San Jose, the old Transbay tube groaned like a trumpet dropped in a stairwell. Energy raced north at 3 kilometers per second, unstoppable, its arrival at the bridge inevitable within 20 seconds. 20 seconds is forever if you are waiting with the right frequencies. Marisol tossed her reeds aside, one clanked into the catwalk, the other toppled overboard, and lifted her arms high. She sang. No instrument, only voice. She sang vowel by vowel, a litany of both lullaby and command. Ah. She modulated in microtones, weaving around the horn's drone, matching infrasound below human hearing. Her throat ached, but she projected across water and steel. Each note translated into balancing vibrations, counterwaves set to cancel the quake's surface wave amplitude. At mile 15 south, the energy still charged forward, but at mile 3 it began to shiver, shedding harmonics like scales. When the seismic front reached the bridge, it stumbled, tumbling into the Serpent's dreamscape, where Marisol's song had already redrawn the laws. Sensors reported only a 5.1 equivalent under the bridge deck, enough to rattle but not to wake. The Serpent stirred, flexed one cable like a tail flick, then settled, its immensity returning to hush. The foghorn chorus decelerated, notes elongating as though padding the nest. Eventually even they fell silent, leaving only the distant yelp of emergency sirens across the city handling the Quake's injuries. Marisol lowered her arms. Sweat matted her hair, breath tore through lungs exposed to biting air. She leaned on the railing, dizzy from the afterglow of forcing tectonic lullabies through vocal cords. "Damien jogged over. The bridge is stable," he said, voice ragged with relief. Engineers reading the sensors are speechless. "They say the ground motion deflected right under us, like the Quake ran into a wall of air." "A wall of song," she corrected softly. He studied her face. "What are you these days, Marisol?" She smiled, tasting copper and salt. "A translator. The earth speaks, I answer." The fog thinned, revealing the skyline flickering with patches of power loss. Helicopter searchlights wove patterns above the mission district. But here, on the Serpent's spine, tranquility reigned. The bridge lights glimmered steady. The cables ceased quivering, a chest rising in measured sleep. "Will it stay asleep?" Damien asked. "For now." She looked up at the towers. Dreams last only so long. Someday another Quake will come, or the city will forget to listen, but we bought breathing room. He exhaled. "I'll get the crews to reopen traffic once we confirm structural safety. People will want to believe the bridge just performed another miracle of engineering." "And you?" she asked. He considered the swirling obsidian dust at the base, the brass reeds at her feet, the hush in the Serpent's vast ribs. "I'll remember tonight differently," he said. "I'll remember that a shaman sang the city back to sleep." Sirens echoed again, this time receding as fire trucks barreled toward damaged buildings in the South Bay. Marisol tightened her coat. "They'll need you." "They'll need you too." "Later. Right now, the Serpent and I share exhaustion." He touched his helmet's brim and walked toward the south anchorage, radio chattering. Soon, traffic would return, lanes filling with commuters who'd retell Quake stories over coffee without imagining an ancient creature beneath their tires. That was fine. Myths survive best when folded into mundane routes. Marisol watched first light bleed across the horizon, turning fog into rose-colored vapor drifting off the water. She hummed a short coda, 3 notes. Gratitude, farewell, hush. Then she retrieved her fallen reeds, placed them beside the ocarina in the cedar box, and latched it. She started across the maintenance pathway toward the eastern sidewalk. Mid-span, she paused to peer down at the tidal churn below. She imagined the Serpent's tail coiled in underwater canyons, muscles relaxed, dreams resuming. Maybe it dreamed of being human for a breath, crossing itself in a car, radio playing pop songs, marveling at how small giants can feel within greater giants. Marisol chuckled despite raw vocal cords. She wished it gentle fantasies. By the time she reached the toll plaza, civil engineers swarmed with tablets measuring minuscule misalignments. One of them glanced at Marisol's cedar box and raised an eyebrow. She simply nodded, kept walking, and slipped past a barricade into the Presidio woodlands where eucalyptus trees bent like sentinels under post-Quake breeze. She found her parked bicycle next to a maintenance shed. The front wheel had toppled in the shaking. She righted it, tested the spokes. Still true, she mounted and coasted downhill. The street smelled of wet asphalt, but power lines above flickered back to life in sections, block by block. San Franciscans emerged from doorways clutching pets, pajamas flapping, phones raised to document cracked sidewalks. They would mention the lull in the shaking near the bridge. Theories would surface. Most would settle on coincidence. At Lyon Street steps, she paused, catching her breath, muscles trembling worse than any aftershock. She pulled the phone from her pocket, powered it on for the first time in hours, and typed a short message to a number she still paid to maintain, though it led nowhere. "Jonah, the Serpent is still asleep. You can rest too." She hit send even though she knew the carrier would bounce it back. Rituals needn't logical recipients. The sun crested the East Bay hills, gilding windows on Nob Hill. Church bells rang, demoed, perhaps fractured by the Quake before their clangs clashed, resolved, clanged again, an unsteady pattern that reminded Marisol of the Serpent's early stirrings. She smiled. Vibrations everywhere, in bronze, in blood, in basalt. The trick was listening, then answering with care. She paddled toward Fort Mason, where her tugboat home bobbed in its slip. Seagulls wheeled overhead, arguing in sharp notes that pierced the fading sirens. She would sleep for a day, maybe two. After that, she would ride among neighborhoods, checking on elderly neighbors, volunteering to shift rubble, blessing broken ground with whispered promises. The lullaby was not only for the bridge, it was for the city bound to it, for every person who had woken believing the world might end, and then found, to their astonishment, it did not. Before descending the final hill, she turned once more to regard the bridge. I took the hail, he said, who was being in dawn's full color. Its towers flared orange like twin suns gatekeeping the Pacific. Nothing about it suggested serpent or sleeper, yet she knew myths hid best in plain daylight. She laid her palm across her chest, felt her heartbeat mimic the bridge's renewed slow cadence, and sent a silent final note across the water. Sleep well. Dream deep. The wind carried back a hush, the sound of cables settling, of scales restitching into steel. Marisol nodded, satisfied, and coasted downhill, wheels whirring like muted reeds, into a city that had survived one more night on the edge of forever.